Starfield came out in 2023 with so much hype that even people who had never played a Bethesda game in their life were watching the reveal trailers. It was supposed to be the game that defined a generation. Todd Howard called it a dream project. Fans called it Skyrim in space. The gaming community was genuinely electric. And then it came out, and the reaction was complicated. Not bad, not great, just complicated. Now it is 2026. The dust has completely settled, and I have spent a serious amount of time going back to this game to give it a proper, honest look. What I found surprised me in ways I did not expect. Let me start with something that a lot of people glossed over when this game launched. Starfield is not really a space exploration game in the way most people assumed it would be. That is where the disconnect started. People expected No Man's Sky or Mass Effect. What they got was a Bethesda RPG that happens to be set in space. Once you understand that framing, the entire game clicks differently. The question is whether that click is satisfying or frustrating, and honestly, the answer depends entirely on who you are as a player. The core gameplay loop is classic Bethesda. You walk around, you talk to people, you pick up quests, you shoot things, you level up, you pick up more things than your carry weight allows, and you fast travel a lot. If you have played Fallout 4 or Skyrim, you already know the rhythm. The shooting mechanics in Starfield are actually a big step up from what Bethesda had done before. The guns feel weighty and responsive. There's real impact when you land a shot, and the variety of weapons gives you a lot of room to build your playstyle. You can go full stealth sniper, run-and-gun chaos, or a tech-heavy build that uses robots and turrets. The combat arenas are mostly tight corridors and outpost-style spaces, which, once you realize the game is not really about open planet roaming, start to make a lot more sense. The skills system is one of the more interesting RPG mechanics Bethesda has built. You pick a background at the start that gives you 3 starting skills, and those choices actually inform your dialogue options and how NPCs react to you throughout the game. Picking a combat background versus a science background genuinely changes how certain quests play out. The skill tree itself is massive, but it has a gating system where you have to complete challenges to unlock the next tier of a skill. On paper, that sounds annoying. In practice, it gives you a reason to actually engage with every weapon type and mechanic instead of just beelining toward your preferred style. It works better than people gave it credit for. Now, here is where the conversation gets interesting: the exploration. This was the single most debated feature of Starfield when it launched, and it is still the thing that divides people today. The game has over 1,000 procedurally generated planets. Most of them are empty. Not empty in a quiet, atmospheric, lonely way. Empty in a there is a rocky hill, some alien crabs, and a mineral deposit way. The handcrafted locations are genuinely great. The cities, the dungeons, the faction bases, the story locations, they all feel alive and designed with care. But the idea that you would land on a random planet and discover something meaningful was almost never true. It created a false promise of exploration that the game could not deliver on. That said, the cities are worth talking about separately because they are some of the best environments Bethesda has ever built. New Atlantis feels like a real futuristic capital city. Neon is this neon-lit pleasure city sitting on a platform above an alien ocean, and it has a sleazy noir energy that I loved from the moment I arrived. Aquila City has a frontier western feel that is completely different from everything else. Each major location has its own culture, its own politics, its own economy, and its own set of problems that you get pulled into. That sense of place in the main hubs is fantastic. The problem is getting between them required loading screens, and that broke the feeling of actually being in a living universe. The main story is where Starfield gets genuinely ambitious and also genuinely divisive. You are a miner who touches an alien artifact and suddenly becomes part of a group called Constellation, which is basically a club for space explorers searching for mysterious objects scattered across the galaxy. The mystery at the center of the story is compelling. The writing builds real momentum as you collect these artifacts and start to understand what they mean. There's a philosophical undercurrent about the nature of existence and what it means to live a life fully that I thought was actually more thoughtful than what you usually get in a game this size. The ending is where people lost their minds. Without spoiling it, the game asks you to make a choice that either fascinates you or completely deflates you, depending on your investment. I've talked to people who thought it was genius and people who felt genuinely cheated. Both reactions make sense, which tells you something about how unusual that ending actually is. The faction quest lines are where Starfield shines in ways the main story sometimes cannot. The Freestar Rangers storyline is a straight-up Western mystery that runs like a tight TV miniseries. The UC Vanguard questline goes deep into the history of the game's universe and has some genuinely unsettling moments. Ryujin Industries puts you inside a corporate espionage thriller where you have to climb the ranks of a megacorporation, and it is packed with the kind of morally gray choices that make RPGs feel meaningful. I personally think the faction content is better written than the main quest, and if you ignored those lines when you first played this game, you left the best parts on the table. The companions are a mixed bag. Sarah Morgan, Barrett, Andrea, and Sam Coe are your main crew, and each of them has a full backstory with a personal quest line attached. Sam Coe's storyline involving his daughter is genuinely touching and one of the emotional highlights of the whole game. Andrea has a background that ties directly into one of the factions in a way that changes how you read her from the start. The issue is that the companions can feel reactive rather than alive. They comment on your actions, they have opinions, but they do not always feel like they exist independently of you the way companions in some other RPGs do. They are good characters in a game that needed great ones to really compete at the highest level. Looking at this game from a 2026 perspective, the visual quality holds up in some ways and shows its age in others. The character models and environmental art in the main cities still look impressive. The lighting in certain locations, particularly at night or in space, is beautiful. But the procedurally generated landscapes look flat and samey compared to what open-world games are doing now. The art direction leans heavily on a clean, NASA-inspired aesthetic for the United Colonies faction and a rougher, frontier look for the Freestar Collective, and that contrast works really well when the game commits to it. The creature designs are creative. Space combat, when it actually happens, looks spectacular even now. The music is one of Starfield's most underrated qualities. Inon Zur composed the soundtrack, and he gave the game a sound that sits somewhere between orchestral epicness and quiet ambient wonder. There are tracks that play while you are just drifting through space that are genuinely gorgeous. The sound design is strong throughout. Guns sound powerful, alien environments have real atmospheric texture, and the silence of deep space is used effectively. The voice acting is solid across the board. No performances that pull you out of the experience and a few that genuinely elevate the material. Technically, the game launched in a reasonable state for a Bethesda release, which is a low bar but one they cleared. By 2026, with patches and community mods, the game runs cleanly, and the mod support that Bethesda opened up turned Starfield into a platform that creative players have genuinely transformed. You can find mods that overhaul the exploration, add new quest lines, adjust the shipbuilding, and push the visuals further. The mod community did not rescue the game, but they extended its life in meaningful ways. The shipbuilding system deserves its own appreciation. Building and customizing your ship is one of the most addictive and creative systems in the game. You can go functional and efficient or completely wild with design. Flying your custom ship and knowing every panel and thruster was placed by you gives the game a personal stake that other systems never quite match. It is the one feature where Starfield feels genuinely irreplaceable. Here is the honest legacy assessment. Starfield is a good game that was sold as a great one, and that gap is why the reactions were so loud. It has real ambition, strong faction writing, satisfying combat, one of the best shipbuilding systems ever made, and a philosophical boldness in its story that most games would never attempt. It also has a broken promise of exploration, companions that needed more depth, and a structure that fights against the feeling of a living universe. In 2026, with better games released since, it sits as a fascinating artifact of what happens when an aging development philosophy meets sky-high expectations. If you have never played it, go in expecting a well-made RPG with great cities and story missions, not a boundless space sim, and you will find a lot to love. If you played it at launch and walked away disappointed, the modded version of this game in 2026 is meaningfully better than what you experienced. it is worth giving it another shot with adjusted expectations. Taking everything together, the strengths, the failures, the ambition, the execution, Starfield earns a 3.5 out of 5. Not a disappointment, not a masterpiece. A game that tried hard, landed some incredible punches, missed on others, and leaves behind a legacy that is more interesting to discuss than most perfect games ever are. If this review gave you a new way to look at Starfield, or if it helped you decide whether to finally give it a real shot, drop a comment below and let me know where you land. Hit like if you want more deep dives like this one, subscribe so you never miss one, and share this with someone who still has opinions about Starfield, because trust me, that conversation is always worth having.